I'm back. Mr. Clark's back. Time to take a look at the ongoing issues with the New Deal and how President Roosevelt is continuing to address some of the issues of the time. As we move forward today, make sure you're filling out the responses. As you do so, you should pause the video if need be. If I'm going a little too quickly, I also suggest that it might be best to, watch this on another device while you have open your Chromebook so that you can respond to the questions. As we continue to look at the 1930s, the deepening depression, and Franklin Roosevelt's reaction to it, we're going to analyze the ways the Second New Deal promoted social and economic reform. And one of the key things to think about, too, is anything we discuss in terms of the 1930s, kind of see which of these programs are still in effect today. And these would kind of be permanent reform programs. And as we move forward, we're going to look at the different types of programs that President Roosevelt passed to help out the country. We're going to explain how New Deal legislation impacted the growth of organized labor. We're going to evaluate the impact of Roosevelt's plan to increase the number of U.S. Supreme Court justices on the Supreme Court. Okay, as we move forward, make sure you get down your responses. What were the goals of the second phase of the New Deal? Question 1. Well, the overall broad plan behind the New Deal was the idea of improving the country, the general welfare of the country, trying to help out all citizens across the board, government intervention to protect citizen rights, take care of the elderly and poor, those who are really vulnerable within society, protect workers' rights. And much like the first New Deal, they emphasized the 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. So let's take a look at some more details about the 3 different types. And you should be able to identify these programs moving forward, which ones are relief, which ones are recovery, which ones are reform. Relief is meant to provide short-term for the unemployed, so like immediate assistance. This would include assistance for food and pay for your housing, your utilities, things like that, making things more instantaneously affordable for you so you can get by. Recovery, this is meant to provide speed, recovery through stimulus, kind of rebuild and repair in many ways the economy. And then reform will be programs that are designed to make permanent changes. So anything that's a reform, it's quite possible that some of the reforms are still in effect today. And we have like a little list of different programs there that kind of fit in those different criteria. Relief, the Emergency Banking Act, the Federal Emergency Relief Act. You notice the words relief in there. Public Works Administration providing immediate jobs for citizens, but those jobs obviously are no longer around today. Civil Conservation Corps, that would be helping out within the environment, cleaning up parks and things like that. Once again, that was a temporary solution. Tennessee Valley Authority, which we'll see helps to build electric power plants. Of course, those electric power plants are still around today, but we're no longer constructing those power plants within those areas. In the recovery area, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. If you remember, the farmers were the ones who were really struggling during that period of time, and this was a program in particular focused for farmers. Then some of the other things here that you should be familiar with, for example, the Glass-Steagall Banking Act, that was where we got the FDIC program, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Securities and Exchange Act, that established the Security and Exchange Commission, which is still around today. Of course, Social Security is still around today. And the 2 labor acts there helped to stabilize the impact of unions and the right for unions to organize and collectively bargain. To explain the benefits of the Works Progress Administration. Well, one, of course, provided government-funded jobs, kind of gave people a sense of pride by allowing them to get a job. This applied to over 8 million workers. The WPA also constructed over 650,000 miles of highways, 125,000 buildings. So these roads and things like that are still in effect today. Obviously, they've been refurbished and repaired over the course of time, but they put in the initial roads to help connect faraway places in the United States. The buildings, some of which are still standing today, some of which might have a stamp on it with the WPA on it as a kind of symbolic of the idea the funding came from this program during the 1930s. Now, of course, a lot of these programs are not cheap. They're very expensive programs. So we should begin to look at question 3. The government was looking for ways to fund these New Deal programs. FDR actually followed the philosophy of the economist John Maynard Keynes, who advocated deficit spending. That meant the United States was borrowing money during this period of time to pay for a lot of these programs. It increased the federal deficit from $461 million in 1932 to $4.4 billion with a B in 1936. If you look at the federal deficit in 1932 at $461 million, we pay more on a daily basis in interest than the entire federal deficit was back in 1932. Question 4, how did John Maynard Keynes justify these deficit spending programs? He was actually advocating what is called pump priming, by putting people to work, putting money in their pockets, affording them the opportunity to buy goods and pay for services. This could potentially stimulate the economy. So he believed this money would come back into the economy. If it was in the pockets, it would then come out of the pockets as people began to spend money in the economy again. Five, explain why Social Security was created and how it works. Well, hopefully you're familiar with Social Security. If you do have a job currently where you're getting paid and receive a paycheck, you're putting money into the Social Security Trust Fund on a weekly or biweekly basis, depending upon when you're paid. It was originally established in 1935 to provide a safety net for elderly Americans. While citizens currently working, including yourself, would pay 6.2% of your income into Social Security Trust Fund. Initially, the program provided monthly pension payments to retirees 60 and older. Today, it's for 67 and older, is when you become fully vested in the Social Security system. By the time you guys retire, the Social Security Fund is still available. I'm suspecting that the retirement age for full retirement might be 70 or 72 by the time you reach that age, 50 years down the road. Another aspect of Social Security is providing disability payments for citizens who are disabled or unable to work. If you look there, a couple different visuals. One's kind of the Social Security Administration symbol or emblem. And then the other one is an example of a Social Security card. You should have a Social Security card already. Maybe you've seen it. Maybe your parents hold on to it for you. But if you go apply for a job at some point in time, or you have already, you'll need that Social Security card and Social Security number in order to get employed in the United States of America. 6, what was the most significant advantage of the Social Security program, as well as the biggest disadvantage? It established the idea that the role of the federal government is to aid and support and help the elderly and the disabled. Early flaws included the fact that domestic workers and farm workers did not receive benefits, because if you were just a farm worker not really receiving an income, not putting money into the Social Security Fund through like a paycheck system, then you would be ineligible for receiving benefits. Also, 2, widows would receive smaller benefits than widowers, meaning that a female who survived her husband would receive less than the husband who survived the female's death, the wife's death. Once again, just gender bias, unfortunately, during this period of time in history. 7, why did electricity become more available at the end of the Great Depression? Well, when the Depression began, only 10% of farmers actually had electricity on their farms. Power companies, per the Tennessee Valley Authority that we alluded to before, and other programs were designed to bring electricity, shockingly enough, for the first time to many communities across the country. For a long period of time, it was too expensive. The amount of money you would get back as a power company would not warrant the investment in the technology in the particular area that needed electricity. So Congress established the REA, or the Rural Electrification Administration, that funded a program to bring electricity to rural areas. And as a result of that, that began to see a more modernization in some smaller rural areas and farming communities. This allowed for people living in rural areas to feel a little bit more in touch with the modern technologies. It allowed for them to begin purchasing things like a vacuum cleaner. If you don't have electricity in your house, you're not really going to be able to vacuum much with an electric powered vacuum cleaner. 3 important results or impacts of the Second New Deal for number 8. Federal government became more proactive, and you would say it's reasonably proactive today in helping citizens in need. Public works projects helped to modernize America, not only building roadways, eventually airports and other things to help out and across the country. It helped to restore confidence in government, banks, and the economy. Once you found out that your bank deposits were insured, you're quite a bit more confident putting money back into the banks. In fact, many citizens during this period of time were very thankful that they were able to have their deposits insured by the FDIC. Nine, how did union membership change during the Great Depression? Why? During this period of time, union membership was expanding as more and more people were getting jobs in cities and in factories that were union jobs. Unions began to fight for better pay, shorter work hours, and better working conditions. They weren't always met with open arms and support from the business owners. Often they were looked down upon. Sometimes, especially earlier on in American history, if you tried to join a union or fight for better benefits, it'd be likely you might get fired. But some of the laws we're going to look at as we move forward here are going to finally provide protections for union workers. 10, the National Labor Relations Act was passed, or known as the Wagner Act. This is kind of a turning point for unions during this period of time. The Wagner Act protected the rights of workers to join a labor union and allowed them to collectively bargain with employers. It was signed into law on July 5th, 1935. President Roosevelt signing the Wagner Act. This gave employees the right under Section 7 to form and join unions, obligated employers to bargain collectively with the union that was selected by the majority of the employees. So if there's competing unions, then the employer would negotiate with the largest union amongst the workers, the one that had the most members. As we're going to see, there's going to be competing unions during this period of time in history to get different groups of people to join. Now, collective bargaining, as we look at 11, is really an essential tool for unions. A lot of different professions have union representation, including teachers are part of the MEA, the Metuchen Educational Association. And we as a union collectively bargain with the Board of Ed for a wide variety of different things, including healthcare coverage, benefits, and things like that. And unions, they have strength in numbers. The more members you have, the stronger the union will be. It's a lot easier to negotiate with anyone if you have the large numbers behind you. Any one person trying to negotiate individually, well, the employer most likely doesn't really need you that badly, so they probably would just fire you. Before these protections were in place, very often you would get fired, and you'd be known as a complainer or a disgruntled employee. And very often business owners had no interest in keeping you on. What rights did workers receive with the Fair Labor Standards Act? They established minimum wage at 25 cents per hour. Maximum work week was expanded or decreased to 44 hours. And there were child labor laws that were put into effect that kind of limit the number of hours somebody under the age of 18 could work and what type of businesses you could work in. 13, why is the issue of raising the nation's minimum wage a politically debated topic even in 2020 and forward? What are the pros and cons of raising the minimum wage? Well, generally speaking, from a political standpoint, liberals or Democrats tend to favor raising it, while conservatives or Republicans oppose it, as conservatives tend to be a bigger supporter and receive more support from big business owners, and big businesses are hurt when they have to pay their lower wage or minimum wage employees a greater salary. A pro to raising a minimum wage, it gives those at the very bottom of the end of the economic ladder a chance at a better life. In New Jersey, obviously, if you're making $10 an hour, it's $400 a week, $1,600 a month. You're making around $20,000 a year. You really can't afford much of anything in New Jersey on that particular price point. You couldn't afford rent or a mortgage. So therefore, that would be something that would make it cost prohibitive for a person to survive in New Jersey on minimum wage. So some people talk more about a living wage opposed to a minimum wage as an option for society down the road. A living wage would be one in which you could afford all the bare necessities relatively comfortably, not like you have so much extra money that you're buying luxury items or anything like that, but you're not necessarily worrying if you can pay your rent or your mortgage or your car payment or cell phone bill or whatever it might be, or put food on the table. Cons to raising the minimum wage: businesses would likely pass on increased cost to all consumers. This could lead to potentially job cuts. And if you raise the wages of unskilled workers, then the skilled workers are going to want a raise as well. So it could have almost like a domino effect, or Pizza Hut, depending upon your choice. Okay, 14, why do workers such as miners and automobile workers feel the need to split away from the AFL and start the CIO? John L. Lewis, the head of the United Mine Workers, felt that the AFL did very little to fight for them, and if you don't feel that you're being represented by your union leadership, then you may want something that's a little bit different. AFL represented skilled workers rather than laborers. Today, these two main unions have united together, as you can see there, the AFL-CIO, and you can see the symbol or emblem there on the right side where they're shaking hands and kind of unifying the union membership together. But this was not true in the 1930s. It's something that would come about a little bit later on in history. '15, why did sit-down strikes, such as the UAW strike and United Auto Workers, this is what UAW stands for, the United Auto Workers strike in 1936, improve workers' rights? Well, this was a pretty dramatic step in Michigan. They went on strike for 44 days. They proved determined and willing to do what was ever necessary in order to bring about positive change for the workers. The UAW also was pretty good in the media. They went to the press and indicated in the quote, they would physically fight to protect their right to strike. Because of some of these strong united words, the governor of Michigan, Governor Murphy, did not break up the strike, even though the business owners, the owners of the automobile manufacturing factories, basically begged the governor to break it up. You can see in the photographs there, they're kind of counting down the number of days that they've been striking, 20, 21, etc. You see the workers in the center photograph there, basically staging literally a sit-down strike. And on the far right is the headline of a newspaper, 24 hurt in the Flint strike riot. Police battle street mobs, governor rushes to the scene. So it was kind of a chaotic situation at one point in time as well. '16, how did the condition of the economy impact the 1936 election? Well, an improving economy led to an overwhelming re-election victory for FDR over Republican Alfred Landon. The popular vote was 61% to 37% for Landon. And you can see there Roosevelt won literally almost every state in the United States. A couple of New England states went for Landon, but the most part, the remainder of the country went for Franklin Roosevelt, who has enjoyed some of the largest election victories in the history of our country. Okay, explain the powers and purpose of the United States Supreme Court. And this is an election issue in many different election years. The judicial branch of the United States government is the U.S. Supreme Court. It determines if laws passed by Congress or even passed in different states across the United States are constitutional or not. Often they take the cases which have conflicting rulings in the lower court. So, for example, recently, in the past several years, they had a number of different laws in states across the country in regard to same-sex marriage. Some states allowed for it to occur, other states did not. So in some cases, you might be married in Massachusetts, but then you move to Mississippi and all of a sudden you're not married. So that was a huge issue, and eventually the Supreme Court weighed in and they kind of ruled in a unanimous, well, not a unanimous court decision, but a affirmation of the idea that same-sex marriage needs to be protected and recognized across all 50 states, which now recognizes marriage of same-sex partners in all 50 states, which is a huge victory for, I guess, justice, and also especially for those who are same-sex partners and want to get married. Other issues here, decisions that establish clear law or rule of law for the nation, which is what the same-sex marriage rule did. Another example from the 1970s was the abortion issue. In 1973, the Roe versus Wade case went in front of the Supreme Court, and they ruled that in all 50 states, you have to allow a woman to make her own decision, and therefore abortion is legal in all 50 states. There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court, an odd number, of course, because it's a one that you want to have a majority decision. The Supreme Court under Roosevelt was very frustrating for him. During the 1930s, the Supreme Court declared several of FDR's New Deal programs unconstitutional, and he was really becoming frustrated because the Supreme Court was slightly conservative leaning, and as a result of the 5-4 conservative breakdown, a lot of his programs were being found to be unconstitutional. 19, assess an argument, kind of one in which you can have your own opinion, kind of go on both sides here. Franklin Roosevelt's plan to add more justices to the Supreme Court. So what Roosevelt came up with was an idea that since Supreme Court positions are lifetime positions, he said, well, there's too many conservatives on there that are messing up my plans. So what we'll do is we'll add as many as 6 additional Supreme Court justices onto the Supreme Court, all of whom would be liberal. That can give him, let's say, a 10-5 advantage, taking a 5-4 conservative advantage and making it a 10-5 liberal advantage. That would give then the liberal government and the Liberal Party, the Democratic Party, a rubber stamp to basically pass any program that he saw fit. This would be a huge expansion of the executive branch of the government. It's interesting that in the 2020 presidential election, then Democratic nominee Joe Biden has been rumored to consider a very similar plan if he was to be elected president. He, along with liberals, are concerned that conservatives control the majority of the Supreme Court. And as a result, if they were to appoint additional justices, even just 3 more or 4 more, that would probably, I'd say 4 would probably do it. So if you added 4 more justices to the Supreme Court, that would give the liberals a pretty sound majority. And that would allow for them to pass probably by a 7-6 margin most things. And a lot of times the more moderate conservatives will look at moderate issues and kind of rule in the favor of moderation. But generally speaking, at least if you added 4 more, that would give the liberals a pretty good shot at getting most of everything done in contemporary society. Maybe they would go for as many as 6, like Roosevelt proposed, and maybe Joe Biden will do a completely FDR court packing scheme idea. All right, so when you look here, FDR chose not to focus on additional new programs late in the 1930s because the economy had taken a little bit of a tailspin, leading to Republicans picking up 7 Senate seats and 75 House of Rep seats. So also some people kind of feel that the overreach here too by adding additional justices and his court packing idea kind of made a lot of people turn on him a little bit. The smaller Democratic majorities made it more difficult for Roosevelt to get some New Deal programs passed. So instead of being so ambitious, he kind of took a step back temporarily. Also, as we're going to see by 1939, Roosevelt's going to become more concerned about World War II and the ongoing foreign policy issues in Europe. Final one here, lesson reflection. How is the American system of government designed to prevent any one branch of the government from becoming too powerful? Well, we have the checks and balance system in the United States, which has proven to be very effective throughout history. With the legislature passing laws, the president gets to sign or veto the law, and then the Supreme Court determines if laws are constitutional. FDR attempted to expand the executive branch with his court packing scheme. During the Vietnam War, the executive branch expanded the war and kind of misrepresented the truth to the American public, and as a result, we got trapped in Vietnam for way too long a period of time. Take a moment or two to get down whatever you need to from the final few questions here. Hopefully you enjoyed our ongoing discussion of the programs of the New Deal and not only how they impacted the 1930s, but more importantly, how they're still impacting us still today. Until next time, Mr. Clark is